Aileen Carol Wuornos was born on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan, to Leo Dale Pittman and Diane Wuornos. Her father, who was just 20 years old at the time, was a convicted child molester with a history of mental illness. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and had a violent temper. He would be arrested shortly after Aileen's birth, leaving her mother to raise her alone. Aileen's mother, Diane, was a teenager when she gave birth and struggled with her own issues, including mental health problems, addiction, and financial instability. She abandoned Aileen and her older brother, Keith, when Aileen was just a young child, leaving the children in the care of their maternal grandparents. Aileen's early years were marked by a chaotic and abusive environment. Her grandfather, a severe alcoholic, was verbally and physically abusive toward her. He often belittled and mistreated Aileen, creating an environment of constant fear and instability. Aileen's grandmother, on the other hand, was emotionally distant and unable to protect her from the abuse. From a very young age, Aileen was subjected to neglect, cruelty, and isolation. These formative years would shape much of her later behavior. At the age of 11, Aileen's life took an even darker turn when she was sexually assaulted by her grandfather. This traumatic experience would haunt her throughout her life. Shortly after this incident, Aileen became sexually active, entering into a relationship with a much older boy in her neighborhood. These early experiences with both sexual abuse and dysfunction played a significant role in the development of her later struggles with relationships and mental health. When Aileen was 13, her grandparents sent her to a home for troubled youth due to her increasingly erratic behavior. This marked the beginning of her pattern of juvenile delinquency. In the years that followed, Aileen would spend much of her adolescence in and out of foster homes and reform schools. Her emotional and psychological struggles grew worse during this period, and she began exhibiting a range of behaviors that were indicative of trauma, including depression, anger, and a sense of abandonment. By the age of 14, Aileen was living on the streets, turning to petty theft and prostitution to survive. These early experiences of survival in the criminal underworld set the stage for her later life. Aileen's relationships were characterized by instability, and she struggled to form healthy, meaningful connections. Her sense of abandonment and lack of emotional support from caregivers created a pattern of dysfunctional relationships with men, which would later manifest in her violent interactions with them. Aileen Wuornos' early adulthood was marked by hardship, homelessness, and escalating criminal activity. By age 15, she had left school in Michigan behind, embarking on a transient life with few resources or support systems. Forced to survive on the streets, she turned to petty theft and sex work, often hitchhiking along highways and stopping at truck stops to earn what little money she could. Life on the road exposed her to a harsh world where survival was paramount and relationships were often fleeting and exploitative. Her first encounter with the law came in 1974, when she was arrested in Colorado for disorderly conduct, firing a weapon from a vehicle, and driving under the influence. This incident marked the beginning of a long list of arrests, primarily for minor crimes like theft, assault, and forgery. Unable to break free from a cycle of poverty and crime, she drifted through several states, including Michigan, Florida, and Colorado, with each arrest adding to her record and making stability feel even further out of reach. In 1976, she briefly married a 69-year-old yacht club president in a bid for security, but the relationship quickly deteriorated due to her volatile behavior. Over time, Aileen's interactions with others, especially men, became increasingly hostile. She carried deep resentment toward those she felt had exploited or hurt her, and her aggression often escalated minor confrontations into intense altercations. Aileen's years of drifting left her deeply mistrustful and isolated, with crime as her only means of survival. The combination of her traumatic past, lack of support, and relentless encounters with the law fueled a growing bitterness toward society. By the time she committed her first murder, Aileen had endured years of hardship that had shaped her into a hardened and desperate figure. Her drifting lifestyle had become a precursor to the violent path she would ultimately take, driven by survival and a profound sense of abandonment. Aileen Wuornos' first encounters with the law marked the beginning of a long, troubled relationship with crime and authority. Her first arrest occurred in 1974, when she was 18 and living a transient life marked by theft and sex work. In Colorado, she was charged with disorderly conduct, driving under the influence, and firing a weapon from a moving vehicle. This arrest foreshadowed a series of brushes with the law as her criminal activity escalated. From petty theft to forging checks, Aileen's record quickly grew, each offense adding another layer of instability and pushing her further from any chance of a normal life. Over the years, Aileen's crimes became a pattern of survival-driven offenses and confrontations with authority. She drifted between states, frequently returning to Michigan, Florida, and Arizona, leaving a trail of police records in her wake. In 1981, she was arrested in Edgewater, Florida, for armed robbery after stealing $35 and several packs of cigarettes from a convenience store. This was her first serious charge, resulting in a prison sentence that would briefly interrupt her drifting lifestyle. Despite her arrests, Aileen was released and returned to the same path, largely due to a lack of support and resources. In 1984, she was again in trouble, this time for trying to pass forged checks at a bank. In 1985, she was arrested in Miami for car theft, resisting arrest, and obstruction of justice after providing false identification to police. Each encounter with the law reinforced her bitterness toward society, solidifying her distrust and anger, especially toward men and authority figures. Her repeated confrontations with police shaped her worldview, turning minor offenses into a way of rebelling against a system she felt had abandoned her. Aileen's encounters with the law escalated in both frequency and severity, and she developed a reputation as a volatile figure. These arrests set the stage for the violent path she would soon embark on, driven by years of survival in a hostile world that had shown her little mercy. Between 1989 and 1990, Aileen Wuornos killed 7 men along Florida highways, a series of crimes that would later earn her infamy as one of America's most notorious female serial killers. Each of her victims was shot at close range, often multiple times, and left along desolate roads. Her stated motives varied. She claimed self-defense, insisting that the men had assaulted or attempted to assault her during their encounters, though evidence would later suggest other motives at play. Her first known victim was Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics store owner. Aileen claimed that Mallory had assaulted her, leading her to shoot him in self-defense. However, the brutality of the killing, he was shot multiple times, set a violent precedent. In the following months, she killed David Spears, Charles Carskadden, Peter Siems, Troy Burris, Charles Humphreys, Walter Antonio, and Dick Humphreys, all under similar circumstances. The men were middle-aged, and like Mallory, each was found shot along remote, wooded areas. Many had been stripped of their belongings, suggesting robbery as a partial motive.
It was pure abuse and pure assault. I don't understand why you people think that I should sit here and cry my brains out for somebody who is going to kill me or rape me or beat me to death.
Wuornos later explained her actions by portraying herself as a victim of a cruel world. She argued that years of abuse and survival in a dangerous lifestyle had hardened her, and she justified the killings as acts of self-preservation.
Did you kill those 7 men?
I killed them, I didn't murder them.
Explain the difference to me.
Okay, murder is first-degree murder in intent, and killing is something you have to do in defense.
So you're saying that all 7 of those homicides were justifiable?
In my belief, yes.
I'm curious, if you believe that, why in the last several weeks have you been telling the courts that you don't want to participate in your own defense, that you want the death penalty?
I'm not going to allow them to put me in life in prison when I've been viciously raped, viciously tormented. I've suffered a great deal. I've been raped numerous times even before I got the gun. Why should I allow you to say, oh, we're sorry, we'll overturn the sentence and give you life? That you're just putting me through torment again when I did something to keep myself alive. I'd rather die.
You'd rather die in the electric chair?
I would rather die in an electric chair or natural death than to live life in prison and be tormented continually the rest of my life when I don't deserve it. It's either acquittal or death.
However, her methods calculated, with several shots aimed at ensuring death, reflected a pattern of cold efficiency rather than spontaneous self-defense. Each killing was marked by a sense of rage, and her use of a .22 caliber pistol became her signature, adding to the consistent approach she took in each attack. The police eventually traced the murders back to Wuornos through eyewitness accounts and physical evidence, including items belonging to the victims. She and her partner, Tyria Moore, were seen driving one of the victims' cars, which raised suspicion. After her arrest, Wuornos confessed to 6 of the 7 murders, claiming the men had all tried to harm her. While her stories were often contradictory, the string of killings revealed a deeply ingrained resentment and anger that had reached a breaking point, leaving a trail of death along Florida's highways. Aileen Wuornos' capture came after a thorough investigation by Florida police, who had begun to link the deaths of several men along highways. The turning point came when Wuornos and her girlfriend Tyria Moore were seen driving a car belonging to one of her victims. After tracing pawned items belonging to the victims back to Wuornos, authorities put her under surveillance and finally arrested her at a bar in Port Orange, Florida, in January 1991.
So I told her I was going to get a motel room and brought the key back, and I gave it to her. And that's when the other cops come in and I arrested both of them.
Look over there now. What's your name, pal? Hey.
The police knew they didn't have a stitch of evidence that could convict Aileen.
Under arrest. For what? For a warrant. For what warrant? A warrant.
But once Aileen was arrested, it was all over. She was guilty. Aileen was charged in the court of public opinion long before this trial ever began.
Following her arrest, police brought Moore in for questioning, and she agreed to help them secure Wuornos' confession in exchange for immunity. Over a series of phone calls, Moore persuaded Wuornos to admit to the murders, appealing to her emotional dependence on Moore.
I met her in a bar. We were sitting on the floor watching TV, and she just come out and said, "I have something to tell you." And I asked her what, and she said that she had shot and killed a man that day.
Feeling she was protecting her lover, Wuornos eventually confessed, claiming she had killed the men in self-defense, insisting they had assaulted or attempted to assault her.
Hello?
Hi.
Yes. Yes.
Hi.
Hey.
I had to call you early because I didn't know if you were going to listen today or what.
What the hell's going on, Lee? They've called. They've been up to my parents again. They've got my sister now asking her questions. I don't know what the hell's going on.
Huh. What are they asking your sister questions for?
I don't know. Lee, they're coming after me. I know they are.
No, they're not. They're innocent.
They've got to. Why are they asking so many questions then?
Honey, listen. Do what you gotta do, okay?
I'm gonna have to because I'm like gonna go to jail for something that you did. This isn't fair.
Her trial, which began in January 1992, was a media sensation, painting her as America's first female serial killer and exploring the dark intersections of abuse, sex work, and mental illness. Wuornos' defense argued that she had been acting in self-defense after enduring violent encounters with her clients, but her multiple confessions and the brutal, premeditated nature of each killing led prosecutors to assert that she was a cold-blooded killer. A key moment in the trial was Wuornos' outburst. At one point, she became visibly angry, cursing at the court and insisting she would kill again if released. These moments underscored her emotional volatility and helped sway the jury toward a guilty verdict. On January 27, 1992, Wuornos was found guilty of first-degree murder in the case of Richard Mallory, and she received the death penalty. Over the next few months, she would plead no contest to several other murders, ultimately receiving 6 death sentences. Wuornos' trial highlighted her troubled life and complex psyche, but it also painted a picture of calculated violence, with her actions falling outside the bounds of self-defense. In 2002, after a decade on death row, Wuornos was executed by lethal injection, leaving behind a legacy of infamy and sparking intense debates about justice, trauma, and the nature of criminality. Aileen Wuornos' psychological evaluation and media portrayal played a pivotal role in how she was perceived by the public and the court. After her arrest, Wuornos underwent numerous psychological assessments, which revealed a complex mental health history marked by trauma, paranoia, and personality disorders. Psychologists diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder, citing her childhood abuse, abandonment, and violent adult experiences as contributing factors. Many believed her deep mistrust and frequent aggression stemmed from years of trauma, making her actions partly a manifestation of her troubled psyche. Wuornos herself claimed that voices guided her actions and that she felt she was on a divine mission. Her statements fluctuated between anger and distress, often shifting her narrative. At times, she claimed self-defense, insisting that each victim had assaulted her, though evidence in her shifting stories suggested other motives. This inconsistency led to speculation about her mental state, with some arguing she was incapable of fully understanding her actions. The psychological complexity painted her as both a product of her circumstances and a cold-blooded killer, fueling debates over her culpability. The media seized upon her story, sensationalizing Wuornos as America's first female serial killer. Her image as a hardened, angry woman who targeted men shocked the public, while her background in sex work and turbulent life story added to her notoriety. Media outlets focused on her violent outbursts in court, particularly when she shouted threats and expletives, reinforcing her image as volatile and dangerous. News headlines and television segments often portrayed her as a monstrous figure, emphasizing her lack of remorse. Over time, her case attracted the attention of filmmakers and journalists who sought to uncover her motivations. Documentaries, interviews, and eventually the 2003 film Monster, which dramatized her life, highlighted both her tragic background and her crimes. This media coverage stirred public sympathy among some, who saw her as a victim of lifelong abuse, while others viewed her as a dangerous predator. Wuornos' case remains one of the most discussed criminal cases, with her psychological profile and media portrayal continuing to spark debate on issues of mental illness, trauma, and the justice system. Aileen Wuornos' execution on October 9, 2002, marked the end of a tumultuous and controversial life. At 46 years old, she was put to death by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. Her final statement was cryptic and defiant. "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day, with Jesus June 6, like the movie, big mothership and all." This bizarre and disjointed remark, referencing a science fiction film, was a reflection of Wuornos' complex mental state and the emotional turmoil she had experienced over the years. Her execution drew widespread attention, not only because of her notoriety as a female serial killer, but also due to ongoing debates about the ethics of the death penalty and the impact of abuse and mental illness on criminal behavior. Wuornos' legacy is a contentious one, provoking discussions on criminal justice, trauma, and gender in the context of violent crime. While many viewed her as a monstrous figure, others saw her as a tragic product of abuse, exploitation, and a broken system. Her case continues to spark debates about the intersection of mental health and the criminal justice system, particularly in cases involving individuals with borderline personality disorder or antisocial traits. Some advocates believe Wuornos' history of abuse should have led to a more nuanced approach in her trial and sentencing, while others argue that her actions, however influenced by trauma, were still indefensible. Culturally, Wuornos became an icon of sorts, representing both a deeply flawed individual and a cautionary tale about the harsh realities of life for women in the criminal underworld. Her story has been portrayed in various forms of media, most notably in the 2003 film Monster, where Charlize Theron's portrayal of Wuornos earned her an Academy Award for Best Actress. The film presented a sympathetic view of Wuornos' life, exploring her troubled childhood, abuse, and troubled relationships, while also confronting the brutal nature of her crimes. This portrayal sparked significant public debate, with some critics questioning the film's potential romanticization of a murderer, while others appreciated its effort to humanize a figure often depicted as monstrous.